Good morning. Great to see everyone again on the start of a action-packed day 2 of the 2022 Women in Politics and Policy Seminar. Here on the, I guess yesterday was International Women's Day, but I think we call this as a group International Women's Week as we pursue this amazing itinerary with this amazing group of students. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator, Miriam Ramirez, to get us going.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Maria Ramirez. I'm a senior studying a double major in political science and international relations. After I graduate, I think I will be going to law school and my dream is to get involved in politics in the future. Today's event means a lot to me because I'm a Venezuelan immigrant and I moved to the United States 7 years ago. It is an honor for me to introduce Adonia Simpson. Adonia R. Simpson is the Director of Policy and Pro Bono at the American Bar Association Commission on Immigration. Ms. Simpson grew up overseas and obtained her undergrad degree from the University of Kansas, followed by her Juris Doctorate from New England Law. Ms. Simpson has a substantial experience in both private practice and legal services. She started her legal career as a fellow for the Center for Law and Social Responsibility, providing representation on special immigrant juvenile cases at graded Boston Legal Services. Ms. Simpson spent 5 years developing and directing family defense program at Americans for Immigrant Justice in Miami, Florida. The program provided immigration education, screening, and representation to vulnerable immigrants throughout South Florida. And she's licensed in Massachusetts and the United States Supreme Court. Thank you so much, Ms. Simpson, to be here today and talk to us about your career and your experiences.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat with everybody and looking forward to all the questions.
Perfect. I'm gonna start, if you're ready, with my first question. My first question is, reading through your biography, I found that you did a fellowship where you participate in a trial observation in Colombia with the support of Pride and Democracy and Lawyers Without Borders of Canada. What things do you learn from that experience that you can also implement in the United States?
Sure. I think first it'd be helpful to give a little background about that experience. First of all, I was a very young attorney. I think I'd been practicing for about a year. I was still learning a lot of things, and I had this incredible opportunity with Lawyers Without Borders Canada to go observe a trial in Popayan, Colombia, which was in the more rural area. And the trial was it was murder charges against about 7 members of the military, and the victim was an individual who was the spouse of a very prominent indigenous human rights advocate, activist in Colombia. So what was interesting about it is that Colombia at this time had recently switched from an inquisitorial legal system to a more adversarial legal system. So before this, I had no idea. So I had to do a lot of research, really understanding Colombia's legal history of its legal system. So to give you a little background, what it means is the inquisitorial system is where the judge plays a more active role in the investigation and getting evidence and weighing of the evidence and questioning the witnesses, as opposed to the adversarial system, which is what we've all probably seen on Law and Order and any legal show where you have the judge who's listening to presentations and questioning by a defense attorney and a prosecutor. So it was a long experience. I went down first for a couple of weeks, but the trial was extremely in-depth. So it ended up I went back down for a second stint of another few weeks. And, beyond learning about like the history and the legal system, I think what the biggest lesson it taught me was just the importance of bearing witness, the importance of being present and just observing. I don't know how much of that observation really ensured that there was due process and that there was an opportunity for all parties to present their cases and evidence, but it's something that has stuck with me throughout my career, just the importance of being present, particularly having a legal degree and a legal background. It can mean a lot, both internationally and domestically. So for example, when we had all the protests recently for Black Lives Matter, I volunteered with National Lawyers Guild and was present to ensure that there was no violations of people's rights, to ensure that that was being handled correctly for the individuals that were protesting. So it has been something that's been very important to me. And that was my first opportunity to really get in there and be immersed in a different situation and take away a lot of knowledge from that. And it really did shape my career as I moved forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much about that. And as I told you, like when I was reading and I saw Colombia, I was like, oh my God, you have experience in Colombia, my never country. I'm from Venezuela. I'm going for my second question. My second question is regarding law school. It is not a secret that the law field is a still male-dominated field. And for example, in my case, I'm a first generation to go to law school, and I'm an immigrant, and I'm a woman. I have two questions for that. The first one is, what type of advice can you give to people like me? And the second one is, what type of hardship do you face in law school, and what tools do you use to overcome them?
Sure. So as far as advice, I think it's really important to remember who you are and where you come from, because that you can't imagine how many opportunities that can open. So for example, as you mentioned in my biography, I grew up overseas, so I do speak Spanish. And it was something that opened a lot of doors during law school. The most critical thing is getting experience. Law school teaches you about the law, but it really doesn't teach you how to become a lawyer. So what really teaches you those practical skills on interacting with clients and interviewing and advocacy really comes through the opportunities that you get during law school. And so many of the opportunities that I got were because I had this, the language ability. So speaking a second language is incredibly helpful. And then also cultural competence, working with individuals from different backgrounds, from different cultures. That was something to highlight on a resume and to highlight in an interview, and was really an important piece of the process, and opened a lot of doors for me as far as internships and externships, and then down the road for job opportunities. So most importantly, don't forget, being a woman, being an immigrant, being, a non-citizen or an immigrant, this all, your advocacy and your perspective, and you'll be surprised how many skills that offers as you move forward in your careers. And the second question, remind me, it was the hardship, right? And
yes.
what tools
because
I use
know,
to overcome them.
I have heard a lot that the first year of law school is the hardest one. And I have heard from different lawyers that they use different things to overcome different difficulties from the first year.
Yeah, so, your first year of law school, wherever you may go, is usually your core bar exam classes. So it's contracts and torts and civil procedure and criminal procedure, and it's scary. There's a saying that your first year of law school, they scare you to death. The second year of law school, they work you to death. And then the third year, they bore you to death. So, your first year is extremely intimidating. It's a very different atmosphere than many people are used to, very Socratic, which means that the professor will just cold call on somebody and ask a question. There's a requirement of just being, I think the biggest tip is you have to be prepared. Hundreds of pages of reading is assigned prior to a class, and you have to read it and know it and be prepared to be put on the spot to have a discussion with your classmates or your professor. So, the number one piece of advice is just being prepared. And don't be afraid to work with your classmates. There's study groups, people, that was a big part of the first year of law school. People got together, we would get together, review the cases, discuss them, make sure that we weren't just, copying down the notes from the case, but actually understanding what it means and how that precedent could apply in future cases and how it's shaped our legal system. So yeah, it's really putting in a lot of work and, treating it like a job. That's my one piece of advice. I really tried to treat it like a job, have a set schedule every day, even on the weekends. I did take time, but, making sure that I did devote some time on the weekends for being prepared, knowing the material, and really enjoying the experience. And, there's also lots of opportunities to get involved in law school. There's student groups whether it's for immigration law or, women's issues, so many different student groups to get involved in, which is another way to really build your network. And during the whole law school experience, a big piece of advice is really keeping that in mind, building your network, using your professors as resources, networking with other attorneys, getting a mentor to really kind of guide where you might want to go. There are so many different opportunities in the law, whether it's, direct services, litigation, policy, the skills that you learn there can translate into many things, even beyond the practical aspects of being a lawyer.
Thank you so much for that. And my last question is, you have a lot of knowledge in immigration, not only national, but international, as you said. To help immigrants, I think you have to open your mind in order for you to understand what they are going through. And my question is, what things have you experienced in difficult cases that shape you as a woman or as a person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Immigration law is complex. And doing direct services, which means working with individuals that are directly impacted by our immigration system, is incredibly difficult. And not just because of the technicalities of the law, but because of things like secondary trauma. And that was something that I learned very early in my career. I had a lot of clients that were fleeing incredibly difficult and horrible situations, who had suffered abuse and persecution and torture. And, part of what we do as immigration attorneys is we have to get into all that information. We have to know their facts, know their case, develop the record to establish that an individual is potentially eligible for the benefits that we're seeking. And it was something that I wasn't prepared for. I think now in law school, people are more cognizant of the impact of secondary trauma and how that can impact advocates and attorneys. So my first couple years, I was working with a lot of special immigrant juvenile, so kids that have just gone through incredible hardships, both in their home countries and in their journey here to the United States, and then also just acclimating to their lives here. And I started getting depressed and I kind of despondent. And at the time, it wasn't something that folks really talked about. We didn't talk about how this sort of work can really impact us. And so that was a big thing that I took away. And so now, I'm very grateful. So many organizations are spending more time to discuss these issues and to support their staff and their attorneys to ensure that this doesn't impact their ability to really fully advocate for their clients. So I think that's really shaped me, like being, the need to be extremely sensitive and compassionate in getting this information, but also understanding, how that impacts me as an attorney, and the importance of sometimes putting up, I don't want to say barriers, but just putting boundaries. I've gotten to the point where I can't be responding to client emails at like 11 o'clock at night. It's important to have personal boundaries, just for your own well-being.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to open the floor for any other students that have any questions.
And I'm happy to answer anything. We can talk about immigration. We can talk about law school. I really want to be a resource. So I see lots of hands. I don't know, Miriam, how you want to.
First, Prachi, you can go.
Hi, my name is Prachi Alwani. I'm from Venezuela, and thank you so much for coming and sharing with us your story and your experience. So currently, I'm working for the International Rescue Committee, and I'm working in the anti-trafficking sector. So I have been really involved with these topics, and it has been like really overwhelmed sometimes when you see the data and everything. So my main question is like, the majority of human traffickings are women, and they usually come like legally to the country. So how do you think we can tackle this issue? How immigration has been working towards that, or how like to defend them or give them like a resource to them, because it's a really like weird situation that is happening.
Yeah, and human trafficking is an incredibly complex issue, and it involves a lot of different things, not just, a lot of people, think of, sex trafficking and things like that, but the more prevalent is actually labor trafficking. So I think you brought up a really common issue where maybe somebody comes lawfully, they come to work in domestic service, or they're promised a job, and then an employer may take their papers, not pay them, threaten to call immigration and have them deported should they say anything. It's an incredibly complex issue. Thankfully, there has been, there is immigration remedies and options available for immigrants that are supposed to protect them and to get them on a pathway to some sort of permanency. But that's easier said than done. And I think you bring up a really good point. Like, just because these laws and options may exist for individuals, how do you actually, get them connected to the resources? Even getting to the IRC or a legal services provider to get the information can be incredibly difficult. There's a lot of studies that show, like, the frontline responders and the first people that really may notice things are, religious institutions, folks that we don't necessarily, not law enforcement, not immigration attorneys, people that may identify that something's wrong are just people that everyday people that interact with somebody that may be suffering this. So I think it requires additional education. And I know the IRC and other organizations across the country that are focusing on trafficking are really working on getting the information out and, providing tips and information on how to identify individuals that may be in these trafficking situations. Did that help? Did that answer your question? It sounds like you have IRC is an amazing organization. So I'm so happy to hear that you're working with them right now.
Thank you so much. Yes, you answered my question.
Thank you, Prachi. The next one is Alexandra.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alexandra. I'm studying political science here at FIU. I'm a freshman, and hopefully I can do a double major in journalism in the future. I was really curious and intrigued about your experience in Colombia. And so my question for you is, what specific legal or law experience in Colombia that you wish to share has shaped you in your career as a lawyer? And from that experience, what piece of advice can you give to law students?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, Colombia was going through a bit of a legal transition. They had this previous, criminal justice system, and we're moving into, kind of a more what we recognize as a legal system, this more adversarial system. So, it was something that they didn't teach me that in law school. So it wasn't something that I really learned about there. So it did require, before I went, I did a lot of research on legal systems, like countries that have transitioned in legal systems. So it was a lot of research in advance. And then I think before you all joined, I'd mentioned this to our moderator, also, legal Spanish can be very different. Like, it was very technical terms, and I speak Spanish, but there was a lot of things that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. And this was back before the age where I had, Wi-Fi on my phone and could just Google something. So I did have like my little pocket legal dictionary, Spanish English legal dictionary, because I wanted to make sure I was really understanding the terminology and what it meant, and if there was some sort of direct translation into, what we viewed in our legal system. So the main thing in a process like that, if you ever get an opportunity to go abroad, is to really understand history, the history of the country, not just their legal systems, but like cultural history. I also had to do a lot of research on, indigenous issues in Colombia, what had been happening. It was a very, there's been a lot of human rights violations, and I'm sure folks are very aware of that. So understanding that history and why this trial was so important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adonia, I also have to add something because I got an internship with this law firm, and I remember the lawyer that told me, I know that you speak English, but you have to learn a whole new English to write prepositions, to write wills, to write everything. So I pretty much have to open my Google Translate in one screen and then like copy and paste it because I couldn't understand anything of the new language. Okay, so let's go to the other question, and the other question is Jamil.
I believe Melanie raised her hand before me. She can go before me.
Okay, so Melanie, you can go.
Thank you. My question is it's kind of simple, I guess, but I wanted to ask if you see a difference in the way that immigrants are treated, like depending on where they go. Like I know, you know, when immigrants come to the U.S., you know, usually we give them like open arms, but I know that maybe in some places that's not the case, or you know, maybe that's just my perception. But I wanted to know if you see in other places like how they're treated, like if they're treated differently than how than how we treat them, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense, and it's a complicated issue. You know, U.S. immigration, you know, particularly at the border, you know, right now what we're seeing is, you know, thousands of immigrants turned away under Title 42, which is, you know, a CDC regulation, health regulation. So we're seeing a lot of people that aren't even able to access our asylum system. So individuals who are fleeing persecution, fleeing, you know, incredibly difficult situations, actually not even being able to seek asylum here. In addition, we've seen the reinstitution, the reimplementation of something called the Migration Protection Protocols, which is the Remain in Mexico policy, which also is applying to other thousands of immigrants, which means that, you know, they're able to seek asylum, but to do so, they're doing so, they remain in Mexico and they're brought back from here for hearings in the US, which is, you know, creates a lot of obstacles for individuals that are seeking to deliver services. You know, being able to access a client who's in a shelter in Monterrey is incredibly challenging. You know, and even once immigrants are able to get here, you know, the process for being able to remain here lawfully is complex. I often told clients that, you know, US immigration laws are actually not built for immigrants. They're actually built really to kind of regulate and control immigration and keep many immigrants out. So there's hundreds of thousands. I think the backlog right now in the U.S. immigration court system, I want to say, don't hold me to this, but I want to say it's like about 600,000. It's quite extensive. And these are individuals that are waiting for their due process and their day in court to be able to have an opportunity to stay here potentially. So our U.S. immigration laws, we have a lot of very welcoming communities. So one thing that you say that's absolutely true, I think that there's a lot of, you know, welcoming of immigrants in various communities, but there's a lot of disparities also amongst immigrants of different races. You know, I'm sure everyone saw what happened in Del Rio with Haitian immigrants that were seeking asylum. You know, and it's not just what happens at the border. We do see disparities in grants of benefits depending on an individual's ethnicity or race. So US immigration is complicated. And then we also see how US immigration plays with other countries' immigration laws. So for example, with the Remain in Mexico policy, it's Mexico, you know, keeping immigrants while they pursue a process in the United States. Also, we've heard reports of increasing, you know, deportations in Mexico to other countries, depending on where individuals are coming from. You know, international migration is a very complex issue right now. I'm sure everyone's watching what's happening in the Ukraine and the hundreds of thousands of individuals that are fleeing to third countries, and you know, the refugee response there is going to be challenging as far as what options people may have in third countries. As of right now, I don't think many of those individuals will necessarily be coming to the United States just because of the way that our immigration laws are structured in our refugee processing. So I don't know, I'm sorry, Melanie, I think I went off on a tangent and really didn't necessarily answer your question. But you know, each country, you know, that's part of like their autonomy is how they regulate their borders and how they regulate individuals that are coming into the country. And I think particularly with Afghanistan and the Ukraine, we're really seeing what's happening in third countries as far as the acceptance of refugees and you know, really having a global immigration crisis that is is becoming pretty unprecedented. And I think it's also important to note what I know Miriam, you're from Venezuela. I mean, the situation with Venezuela and like the issue with migrants fleeing there, and it's one of the largest exodus that we've seen. So sorry, Melanie, that was not a great answer.
No, you answered it well, and it's interesting. I like that you brought up the race and ethnicity thing, because I mean, I didn't do much research besides seeing these videos, but I know a lot of people were like posting these videos of there were Black Ukrainians trying to like flee Ukraine, and they were kind of pushed to the side for non-Black Ukrainians. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's interesting to see how that,
it's a very big issue. It's starting to get more attention. Not just our U.S. domestic immigration laws and how race factors into that, but also internationally. And I'm glad that you pointed that out. Yes, that's a story that I don't think is getting enough attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next one is Jamil.
Thank you. And good morning, Adonia. Thank you for your time, and thank you very much for all your input. My name is Jamil. I'm a senior at FIU studying political science as well as international relations. Before law school, I planned on getting a master's degree in cybersecurity and technology policy, just because I want to be a cybersecurity attorney as well as be a participant in the policy discussions in that regard. I guess my question is what sort of resources did you use to get ready for the LSAT? I know a lot of our cohorts here are interested in going to law school, and we're all interested to know what kind of resources, current lawyers used.
Gosh, I mean, I'll be really honest. It was a really long time ago. Don't tell anybody. It's been a little bit. I think I invested in one of those prep classes. What's difficult about the LSAT is a test that is actually designed to see how well you're going to take the bar exam, right? And law schools are all about, people passing the bar exam. So I think the LSAT, if you've done a practice test and you haven't done well, please don't beat yourself up on it. A lot of amazing attorneys that I know have gone on to do amazing things, and they didn't ace the LSAT. It's a test that tests your test taking. So, my biggest recommendation, if you have the resources, there's a lot of good books out there that teach you all the tips on how to approach the questions. Frankly, I don't even really remember the LSAT, but I think, so much of your LSAT score is going to maybe play into like where you go, to law school and maybe what you want to do. And, law school, so much of law school is about, the experiences that you get and the network that you make. So gosh, I feel like this is a horrible answer, but if you can do a course, perhaps do that. Also, I just know there's a lot of, and now like with technology, I'm sure it's all virtual. And, I actually had to go to like a physical course, like, every couple of days. And I'm sure there's like resources and books available from your library, or that you can purchase, and like you can read it on your tablet or some way. You don't actually have to have a physical book. So, keep in mind that it is a test that's really gauging your ability to pass the bar. So it's not a test that says how great of an advocate you're going to be or how amazing of an attorney you're going to be. That's what it's testing. I don't know if the folks wanted to hear that, but.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm studying for the LSAT, and I'm using 7-Sage and the introduction. They told us that for the LSAT, you don't have to study the material, but you have to study how to take the test. So that's the difficult part, because like the questions are about biology, everything. So the last question that we have right now is Ashley. Before, go Ashley.
Hello, hi, my name is Ashley De Oliveira. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm a junior and I'm a political science major, and I'm considering going to law school with a specific interest in immigration. I also am doing studies in Latin American politics and Portuguese and stuff like that. So I guess my question for you is, I really pay a lot of attention to politics and have for a long time. I'm 38, so I'm a little older than maybe some of the people. This is a career change for me. But over the years, politics towards immigration have noticeably become more and more polarized. In the past, politicians would at least make an effort to have legislate in some way on some big immigration policy. They would end up disagreeing, or it would pass the House or the Senate, but not the other, you know. But now it's just completely, it's like a non-starter almost, you know what I mean, for one of the major parties in this country. So historically, you know, my mother was a genealogist, and so I've always been glued into our family's immigration story. We had Polish relatives that came over, you know, just before the turn of the century in the late 1800s, but that's always been a big part of, you know, our family's history. So, and the country for everybody, that's how we all got here, you know. So I kind of see that it feels like that awareness or that care or pride about that fact has been fading in this country, and it reflects through our politicians and the lack of legislation for immigration. So how, as an immigration attorney, do you kind of deal with that? Because it seems like I'm really interested in fighting that fight, but it seems like it could feel hopeless, and you want legislation to get passed so things will work better for people, you know? So I don't know, do you find loopholes for clients, that ways to work around stuff? Do you participate in any kind of, like, you know, lobbying for legislation on immigration? And do you see hope in the future that it will ever happen?
Oh gosh,
It's a big
Ashley,
question, but
yeah,
thank you.
that's a huge question, but a really important question. And Ashley, you point out a lot of really, you know, important issues. I mean, like, let's think about it. The last time we had any positive immigration reform, anybody want to take a guess what administration it was? Take a guess. No wrong answers. Well, I guess it would be there. There is a right answer.
Was it the amnesty that passed in the 80s, or
with Reagan?
I know, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the actual last time we saw any sort of like really big update to our immigration laws that benefited immigrants, and particularly immigrants that have been living here, you know, perhaps without status, and you know, and our immigration laws have not really kept up with our needs. You know, I think there's a lot of focus on what's happening at the border and humanitarian immigration, but there's also huge issues when it comes to employment and labor. You know, there's some people that are saying that, you know, in the next decade or two, you know, we're not going to have enough people paying into Social Security. And, you know, that could have really far reaching implications. And even right now during the pandemic, we've seen issues with employers not being able to find enough staff. So, you know, it's become very polarized, which is unfortunate because, you know, immigration does have a net economic gain. It benefits business, it does benefit employers. You know, we've seen huge decreases in actually, you know, students from abroad coming that are gonna, you know, advance our STEM work and, you know, really important things. We see individuals now going to Canada or the UK as opposed to coming to the United States. So, you know, there's a lot of different aspects of immigration, not just, you know, humanitarian, which is incredibly important. But I think what we've seen in the last, you know, decade is that, you know, our immigration laws, as I said earlier, really aren't built for immigrants. You know, and there's been efforts to do very piecemeal legislation. And as you've noted, Ashley, it's been a bit of a non-starter, you know, even for our DACA youth, our Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, you know, young people that came here, you know, and don't have status and have been able to get DACA, you know, but it doesn't provide a pathway to permanency. Likewise with temporary protected status, you know, we have, you know, individuals from Central America that have been here 2 decades on temporary protected status and may not, you know, have alternative options to get permanent residency and get on a pathway to citizenship. Even now, something that may be of surprise to you all with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, there's a big push for an Afghan Adjustment Act, similar to what we saw with the Cuban Adjustment Act, to allow, you know, Afghan parolees to be able to apply as a refugee essentially and get a green card. And even that's, you know, creating a lot of debate. The one thing that is important to note, you know, over the last, you know, 8 years, particularly 4 years, there was a lot of discussion of changes in law. Actually, there hasn't been any changes really in law. What we've seen have been changes in policy. And the executive, you know, the executive branch does have a lot of authority in the execution and implementation of its immigration laws. So that's what we really saw, what we've been seeing so much change in. We've seen policies changing the way that we have enforcement, whether it's around how much discretion ICE has in, pursuing removal against a person or, granting a benefit. And then that's where there's actually a lot of space for advocacy within administration. Any sort of legislation doesn't appear to really be happening at this point. However, there are opportunities in advocating with the administration, with different agencies, whether it's the Department of Justice on issues with the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is the immigration court system, or if it's with Department of Homeland Security on the way that USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, treats certain immigration benefits. So for example, I believe it was yesterday, time kind of blurs together in these remote times, but just yesterday, the administration announced that that they will now grant deferred action and work authorization for special immigrant juveniles who have an approved visa petition, but are in an incredible backlog that's going to take 5, 6, 7 years before they can apply for a green card, which left a lot of young people in a situation where they weren't able to work lawfully. So that small policy change in allowing deferred action and work authorization for this group of individuals is going to have a huge impact. So little things like that is where, immigration advocates have a lot of opportunity, and it's not all doom and gloom. And with that too, what we've seen is, as there are changes in policy, there is litigation. We do see challenges to certain policy changes. And, most of this litigation oftentimes surrounds what's called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is how agencies are supposed to promulgate their rules and regulations in the implementation and execution of certain laws. So, Ashley, did that kind of address your question? It's not all doom and gloom. There are opportunities. There are things that we can be doing. There is advocacy, even if, I think we all would hope for, an update in immigration laws themselves to, address the needs of whether it's our economy or our young people or our, temporary protected status holders. But right now, we're waiting to see.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a great answer. I mean, with clients, do you find there's a lot of, paths you guys can do to help extend things, or I don't know, you know what I mean, working?
Yeah, it's challenging, and now in my current position, I've moved more away from direct services. But when I was in Miami, I did lots of consultations, and a lot of people actually just don't have options right now. And those are difficult conversations to have with individuals. I see somebody who says, but I've lived here 15 years and I pay my taxes and I have three children. Like, what do you mean there's no option for me? And oftentimes the answer is there's just, as it stands right now, unfortunately, there is no option. So those are the things that really inform like our need for some sort of bigger change, just because there's only so much we can do with policy. There are a lot of things that can benefit specific clients, but there's still a lot of people that are left without options.
Thank you so much.
For our next question is Angela.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Angela. I am a senior. I'm majoring in public policy and administration with plans to go on to graduate programs at FIU to use that research to engage Black women in public policy, humanitarian efforts, domestically and internationally. So I really, you answered so many of my questions with Ashley's question. So I really only have one more small question. You mentioned the Del Rio situation with Haitian, with our Haitian immigrants seeking asylum, and also what we've seen in Ukraine with African students just trying to get out of the country. So these last couple of years have really shown me more of what our country and other countries consider to be desirable immigrants. And I think a lot of those students, I know a lot of those students were shocked to learn that, they weren't seen as necessarily a total human trying to escape a war because of their race and immigration status. So I know that a couple of them don't understand their rights. And then even at the border, with the border crisis here, just with the Del Rio incident and immigrants leaving South America who've been there for a few years and are fleeing those countries and trying to come north, just at these border stops, what would you like to see with all of your experience, your cultural competency, your awareness, knowing the personal stories at the US border that could advocate for educating those seeking asylum and immigrating here on their actual rights? I know that a lot of people don't understand what to do, what their rights are, and how to go about, maintaining asylum once they get to the border.
Yeah, and I feel like so many of my answers right now, and I apologize, it's complicated. And there's kind of two aspects to your question, Angela. Like, first of all, there's I think there needs to be kind of more transparency on what's happening on the government side, as far as transparency and education and, really reinforcing that the agents and the officers that are interacting with immigrants understand people's rights, and there has been a bigger push for that. And particularly since Del Rio, there are investigations happening, but I think it's transparency on that side of things is really important. And that's kind of because those are the front lines of people that are interacting with immigrants. And because of the things that I mentioned earlier, whether it's the Title 42 CDC guidance, or the Remain in Mexico policy, accessing, for legal services organizations or advocates to actually access, immigrants before they get to the border is incredibly challenging. There are a lot of legal services organizations that do know your rights information and presentations. So for example, the ABA Commission on Immigration, we have 3 projects. 2 of them are border projects, one in San Diego, one in Harlingen, Texas. And a lot of what they do is trying to get access to people and make sure they understand their rights and their information. Like, for example, individuals that are being evaluated for this Remain in Mexico policy, what happens is they go through something called a non-refoulement interview, which is NRI, which is essentially assessing their fear of persecution or torture if returned to Mexico. And a lot of people don't understand this. And we've been volunteering and doing phone consultations with individuals who are being evaluated with this process, who are going to have an interview with an asylum officer, explaining what this process is, explaining what their rights are, explaining that they have a right to an attorney, which I should mention in the immigration process. Yes, you have a right to an attorney, but one will not be appointed or paid for you. So if people don't have resources, or access to a legal service organization that has capacity to help, the vast majority of people actually do go unrepresented. Sorry, I went on a little tangent there again, but as far as getting information, I think what is good is we have access to so many great technologies. More and more clients use WhatsApp. A big way that when I was at AI Justice in Miami, we would do little recordings and share them and ask individuals to share them in their networks to try to get information out there. So I think, we've learned a lot of lessons in the pandemic on how to use technology. And I think that same technology can be used to provide educational information to people that are fleeing and potentially seeking protection at our border. So it's a matter of getting the right information out there and getting the right means of communication in networks and communities.
Thank you.
So I'm a big fan of WhatsApp.
I'm going to read one question that Angelo wrote in the chat. He's asking, what are some resources or links to become more familiar with the U.S. immigration policy and to get more familiarized with the terms and jargon surrounding
Oh
it?
gosh. Yeah, as immigration attorneys, we love acronyms, and oftentimes I have to remind myself that I can't speak in acronyms. So there are a lot of terms, the government actually has really good resources. So if you go to uscis.gov, they have a lot of information, all of their immigration forms have actually pretty well done instructions. So that's one place that you can get a lot of information. So, go straight to the government, uscis.gov. Alternatively, EOIR, which is the Executive Office of Immigration Review within the Department of Justice. They have kind of information on how their process works. But there's a lot of national organizations that have great practice guides on recent issues. So for example, the American Immigration Council, AIC, they have, they're constantly putting out great practice guides on recent policy changes. And it depends on what you're interested in. Immigration is so many different things. As I hinted at earlier, it's, employment-based and family-based and humanitarian, and things are happening in all those aspects all the time. I think I can put more thought and share with Eric some other maybe resources. It's okay to Google. It's okay to Google. Just make sure you're going to reliable sources, whether it's a .gov or .org, and you can go down kind of the rabbit hole of information. There's a lot of great information out there, but particularly from the government and from national legal services organizations. NIJC is another one that I would really highly recommend. It depends on what your interest is, and I'm happy to provide some follow-up information after this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next one will be Lydia.
Good morning. My name is Lydia. I'm a junior at FIU studying hospitality management. So it's a little different, I think, from everyone else. But my interest is because I am the right-hand person to my pastors at our church where I've been at for over 20 years. And our church is mainly Hispanic members. So I'm caught as the person to have to know, or the go-to to the pastors to know, where do we send our congregation to get information like this? Because we have a lot, I'm going to say maybe 75% of our church are immigrants. A lot of them, maybe half of those are undocumented. And they'll come to me and ask, where do I go? So are there agencies that we can send them to that would give them correct information? Do they just speak to a lawyer? But then I've seen both sides where you have helpful lawyers and you have lawyers that just string them along just to keep getting money from them. So I don't know how to help. And then you have the teenagers, you have some that are able to qualify for DACA, some that can be here on visas for a short time. So how do you help them as well?
Lydia, that is such a fantastic question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. Getting the right information is so important, particularly when there's kind of policy changes and things happening. Misinformation runs rampant, and particularly there's a lot of issues of fraud from non-lawyers. We've seen particularly I remember in South Florida there was like a lot of notarios that were particularly Venezuelan asylum applications, that were really kind of prejudicing people and causing a lot of problems down the road. So how to get the right information is really great. Lydia, are you located in the Miami area?
No, I'm actually in Maryland. So I work with a lot of people either in DC or in some of the
great.
counties.
I wasn't sure where you're located at. So first step would to be it's great that you're in the DMV area because there are actually a lot of legal services providers. So something that you could always do is approach one of them to see if they have an attorney that would be willing to come do a Know Your Rights presentation. A lot of organizations, it's really helpful for them to have an audience, a big audience of people, and be able to kind of provide all the information and answer general questions. So that could be really helpful to folks in your congregation, providing that sort of opportunity. There's a resource called the Immigrant Advocates Network. They have a way where you can find legal service providers by zip code. That's another way, try as much as possible to guide people to legal services organizations, because generally they're very good about just providing information, telling people when they don't have a case, which is, I think, Lydia, is something that you pointed out. There's oftentimes attorneys that will, or folks that will make promises that maybe can't be met, given the current state of immigration laws. So, asking for a presentation, an immigration presentation from a legal services provider. Sometimes legal service providers may ask for like a small donation just to cover their time, if that's something that's feasible. A lot of them will do it for free too, because getting the right information out there is so incredibly important to immigrant advocates and people providing legal services. Alternatively, yeah, you can do, find legal services providers via the Immigrant Advocate Network. Also, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has a find attorney function or attorney referral service where you can search by language, by area of expertise. Just because somebody's an immigration attorney doesn't mean they necessarily have experience on a certain issue. So for example, I know just a passing amount of employment-based immigration. I would not be competent to advise somebody about their options or how to proceed with a petition. But when it comes to family and humanitarian, so you're able, through AILA, you're able to search based on the issue. So if it's like a visa extension issue, as you mentioned, there might be some young people that are here on visas, or there's also a way to search for attorneys that have experience on DACA. Caveat on DACA, just to make clear, through the litigation, DACA still exists, but they're not accepting new applicants. So every day we have young people that become eligible for DACA. And unfortunately, with the state of litigation right now, individuals who've had DACA in the past can renew, but new applicants unfortunately cannot apply right now. So Lydia, that would be my suggestion. Like I said, I know I've done tons of Know Your Rights presentations in my past life at a legal services organization, and it was one of the things I enjoyed the most, just making sure people got the right information.
Thank you. The next one, Susanna, you have the floor.
Sorry, I have to, putting my hand down always messes me up. So good morning. My name is Susanna Barr. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies here at FIU. My study area is in food access, and I've been working in the Dominican Republic for the last 10 years on and off. And my question is a little bit out of left field. So as someone who studies the food system and thinking about things like globalization and the way food policy affects things like immigration and the movement of peoples and livelihoods in other countries, this is kind of just a curiosity question of like what policies not directly related to immigration do you think would have a huge impact on immigration in the US, like domestic policies? Like what areas of policy, like if you could change one and it would have a demonstrable impact in your work or the experiences that you observe, like what would you change?
Yeah, this is stumping me a little bit. I mean, something that comes to mind that is an immigration policy but dealt with a lot of other issues is a while back we saw a change in the rules, or a proposed change in the rules when it came to the public charge rule. So what public charge is certain immigrants who are applying for a benefit, a permanent residency, for example, they're evaluated to see if they might become a burden on the government. And the way that this had been traditionally treated was individuals would get a sponsor who would sign off on a form saying that they would support this individual if need be for 10 years or until the person became a US citizen. And any benefits that were counted on this, that kind of counted as a public charge issue, were generally ones that immigrants weren't eligible for. What we saw happen, I want to say about 4 years ago, is we did see a change in that policy where it really, there was a lot, first of all, there was a leaked version that said that, children getting benefits could be a negative factor. Essentially, the leaked version did a lot of damage. The actual rule was still not great in the sense that that it included a lot of discussion of a lot of public benefits, whether it was SNAP benefits, healthcare benefits. And what we saw was it played into a lot of fears in immigrant communities. We saw that it impacted people, even like for seeking help from FEMA. Following a disaster, individuals didn't want to get any emergency support because they were worried that it might lead to deportation. We saw people not want to enroll their U.S. citizen children in like healthcare benefits or take, food stamp benefits to which their children were eligible for. Because of fear of immigration repercussions. So I think you bring up a really good point that there's a lot of other policies and things that happen outside of immigration that can really impact the way that immigrant communities feel and fear that they may have, and accessing important benefits that would make sure that their families are healthy. That was, sorry, I think that might have been a little off topic because I'm trying to think of other, kind of policies that impact immigration and immigrants. But that was the first thing that came to mind when you were discussing it, particularly around food.
Yeah, that's really, I had no idea that was a rule. And while it makes sense thinking about the government deciding whether you're a burden on society, that hurts my brain in some ways.
We can have a whole like 2-hour discussion on that. And it's been rolled back. I mean, thankfully it has been. Thankfully it has been rolled back, but a lot of damage was done by that. I still have recently talked to families that are afraid to access support for their family that they're entirely eligible for just because of those concerns.
Thank you for answering my weird question.
I love weird questions. I may not answer it on point. I may answer it over here, but I'll give it a shot.
Before getting to Melanie, Lydia wrote in the message saying that if we go get the list of resources like you just mentioned, so she can, because she couldn't write them all.
Sure.
Or you can send it to Eric or at the end of the meeting. Yeah.
How about that? I'll send.
Yes.
If you all remind me all the things that you want from me, I'll send you a full summary to Eric to share with you all.
Perfect. So Melanie, you can ask your question now.
Hello again. I know we were talking previously about like immigration policy and how it's very like complicated right now. But I wanted to ask, I know like back in the 90s, the agreement between the US and Cuba with the wet foot, dry foot policy, and how that didn't end until 2017. And I know there's a lot of controversy with that policy because it's like it only favored one group of immigrants versus all the other, regardless of, like the political, how it was before back when that happened. And like you said, immigration is really complicated right now. I wanted to know if like there is any, I guess, hope for policy like that one, or like is that type of policy like done for good, where it's kind of like, if you get here, we can help you with residency or whatever. If you don't get here, if we stop you, like you go back. Like, is there any type of policy you see ever coming like that, or like that's it?
Well, that's like, let's talk about what the wet foot, dry foot policy was first. So, I mean, I think there was a lot of confusion when that policy got rolled back, thinking that the Cuban Adjustment Act had been undone. But the Cuban Adjustment Act still exists, which means that if you were admitted or paroled into the United States, that a year after that, you're able to apply for a green card. And there's only been I think you brought out something important. That's like, there's very, Cuba and like Vietnam, there's only been like very select populations that have been eligible for a program like that. What the wet foot, dry foot policy was, it was a long-standing policy that if an individual from Cuba was able to make it to land, they were automatically paroled. That meant they've got a parole document, so they met this kind of first qualification for the Cuban Adjustment Act. And when that policy was rolled back, really the way it didn't impact as many people as you may think. A lot of Cubans still presenting at the border were being paroled in and still getting a parole document. Not always, but there's also a lot of legal arguments that any sort of release from CBP custody, even if you weren't given a formal parole document, was parole for purposes of the Cuban Adjustment Act. We did see a lot of Cubans in the Remain in Mexico policy under the first iteration that was ended, but now is reinstituted. And those individuals that were going through that process were often when the program was terminated, they were paroled in, and now, a year and a day after admission would be eligible for Cuban adjustment. And then, so, I mean, I think the policy, I think that's one of those examples when that policy was rolled back. A lot of people thought it was the end of the Cuban Adjustment Act, and it wasn't. The Cuban Adjustment Act is a piece of legislation that still exists. But I think, sorry, I think can you repeat your question? I kind of went on a.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask if there's any like hope for future, like maybe policies for other groups that might help them get here a little bit, faster than the typical process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion around reinstituting, parole processes. So something that's been a big issue, particularly like with Afghanistan, is there's many individuals that are still in Afghanistan, many individuals in third countries that were seeking something called humanitarian parole, which is essentially showing that there's some sort of urgent humanitarian reason that you should be paroled into the United States. Parole is not a permanent status. It does not provide a pathway to citizenship in and of itself. But what we've seen, in the last like 4 or 5 months is that, I think there's like 42,000 Afghan humanitarian parole applications pending. And we're starting to see a lot of denials, very, very few approvals. So there's a lot of advocacy happening on that. So there might be efforts to kind of do that same sort of thing, like making parole for individuals potentially to be able to come here more quickly, but it doesn't solve the bigger issue. That means that individuals that come under a parole would still need to either apply for asylum, which is extremely technical, or alternatively, there needs to be some sort of actual legislation like an Afghan Adjustment Act, similar to the Cuban Adjustment Act. But we have seen other efforts for other populations to streamline opportunities to be paroled in. So for example, sometimes family-based applications can take decades, and it's not necessarily a quick process for a visa to become available. So there has been programs in the past, and there's talk particularly around Haitian reunification and Cuban reunification, the ability to like bring people more quickly to reunite with family here in the United States. So it is something that is, that there's been a lot of discussion with in the administration. There are some options, but even if there's a way for folks to be able to arrive here more quickly, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have an option to get permanent residency down the road.
Thank you.
And folks, if I get too legalese, please jump in with questions. I love talking about this, so happy to kind of break it down more.
Ms. Simpson, I know we passed, right now we are 11:02. I'm not sure if you still have time for one more question.
I can do one more question.
Okay, it's from Joy. He's asking, are there any special circumstances or considerations in place for women who may be trying to flee bad situations such as domestic violence from abroad?
Wow, we could have a couple-hour conversation on this. Immigration is, so there are some pathways for survivors of domestic violence. We have something called VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act. It doesn't apply just to women, it applies to anybody who's been a survivor of certain types of violence, but that requires that the abuser be a US citizen or lawful permanent resident. We also have options like a U visa for people that have been a victim of a crime here in the United States. But I think the question is really going more towards a really complicated string of litigation and case law, which surrounds the ability to seek asylum based on being a survivor of domestic violence. So asylum, as I hinted at earlier, is extremely technical. There's all these different elements. Having a fear of returning to your home country is not enough for asylum. There's certain elements that you have to prove to be able to potentially qualify. So first, you have to show that that you have a well-founded fear that you have been persecuted in the past, and that you have a well-founded fear of future persecution. And future persecution is persecution in and of itself is a very technical legal term that could mean a lot of things. It looks at the totality of the circumstances. It could be like one extremely violent incident, or it could be a string of less serious instances and emotional abuse and things like that. Beyond the persecution, you have to show that persecution was on account of or because of your membership in a protected group. And there's 5. There's race, national origin, political opinion, particular social group, and religion. Sorry, I had to think. I had to count on my fingers, and I don't know if I missed one. But what gets really complicated in immigration law is so many of the cases, there's very straightforward political persecution cases, right? Or religious persecution. But where a body, like the majority of asylum cases do fall, are within this very amorphous particular social group. So individuals who are fleeing because of domestic violence are usually trying to structure their argument within this group of a particular social group, which it can't be too small, it can't be too big, it can't be circular, meaning like the fact that you're a victim or a survivor of domestic violence can't be the particular social group. So what we saw happen, and sorry, I know I'm going way over. I know folks have to jump off. I know you all are busy. Feel free to jump off if you need to. But there's a long line of cases. So there was a case called ARCG, which came out, I want to say maybe 6 years ago, from the Board of Immigration Appeals, from the Attorney General, which really said that individuals, if you kind of structure your argument like women who are unable to leave their abusive relationships, like that would be a particular social group. So we saw a lot of survivors benefit and be able to seek asylum kind of on this creative argument, right? Being a survivor of domestic violence in and of itself is not for asylum. You still have to make these arguments and structure a particular social group. We subsequently saw some litigation called Matter of AB, which undid that case and really kind of closed the door in a lot of ways for individuals trying to make these arguments for asylum based on surviving domestic violence. But now we saw it reverse again. The Matter of AB cases were recently vacated, which means the original case law kind of still stands. So this is the really interesting thing, and one of the things I love about being an immigration attorney is things change, and you have to like really stay on top of case law and policy changes, because these things really can make a difference in the trajectory of somebody's case and ability to stay here. So I'm sorry for like the history on that, but it's a fantastic question, and a very, very interesting area of immigration benefits as far as survivors of domestic violence. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we finished with the questions and answers. Thank you so much, Ms. Simpson, to be here today. I really enjoy your talk. Like, I love how you answer each question with passion and giving us details so we can understand actually what you are talking about. I'm not sure, Eric, want to say something?
Well, in addition to my own thank you of Adonia on behalf of myself, Dr. Montgomery, and FIU, we of course need. In addition to giving my own thank you to Adonia on behalf of myself and FIU and Dr. Montgomery, we of course have to thank and give a virtual round of applause to Mariam for doing an amazing job leading today's session. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. Always happy to chat. Eric has my contact information. Y'all are doing amazing things. I was so impressed with your questions and comments, and I'm always happy to be a resource as you all move forward in whatever next steps you have.
Great. Well, we'll see the group back at 2 o'clock for our next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks so much,
you.
Adonia.
Thank you so much.